Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and
Jason is skiing, I guess, here.
I'm racing downhill.
You are. On this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we're talking about Downhill Racer, the debut film from director Michael Ritchie. Our first feature pick for a notable debut from a major filmmaker. We'll get into whether this is the most auspicious debut, but Michael Ritchie went on to a long career, most notably for sports movies like this one, what I kind of call dirtbag sports movies. The Bad News Bears probably being the most famous one, but he made, I think, 7 or 8 sports movies over the course of his career, starting with this one.
Yeah, you and I both watched Digstown this week, which is a fun one. I rewatched Bad News Bears. That's, Walter Matthau's just a classic guy in there. But he, when you think of 80s comedies, Josh Fletch, The Golden Child, he was, he was working, always working, it seemed like, Michael Ritchie.
Yeah, I mean, and he had some kind of different phases to his career or different modes that he worked in that we'll, I'm sure, talk about more later. But he started here with this film starring Robert Redford as the downhill racer, a Olympic hopeful skier, and with Gene Hackman as his coach and Camilla Sparv as his girlfriend, and a lot of pretty impressive skiing footage, I think, is one thing at least that we can probably agree on in this film.
I mean, that's the best stuff in here. They do a really good job of showcasing the downhill racing, Josh.
Right, and especially given the technology. I mean, now you can anyone can strap a GoPro to their head or whatever and get footage that looks kind of like this. But given the technology of 1969, it was impressive that they captured this kind of footage. And skier Joe J. Jalbert, I don't know how you pronounce his name, but he was the skiing double for Robert Redford and captured a lot of that footage himself by skiing with a camera on.
JJJ. Everybody knows
JJJ. Exactly.
Josh, we should put a GoPro on your head while we film this, while we record this podcast. I think people would be excited to get your...
I don't know. They would see the screen that I'm looking at of the two of you guys, and then some of my written notes. Yeah, it's almost exciting.
Sounds great.
Almost as exciting as the skiing footage in this movie.
Not quite.
No, probably not. But yes, the skiing footage was impressive. This is loosely, apparently, basically not based on a novel, but was reinvented by screenwriter James Salter and Michael Ritchie into something different. It was not a huge hit. We're talking about whether this was a big debut for Michael Ritchie, who had worked in television prior to this. It grossed $1.9 million on its budget of $1.8 million. So that's not really much of a success. And it was released 1 month after the film that we just talked about in our last episode, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which was the biggest hit of the whole year. So, and was such a big, breakthrough for Robert Redford. You can imagine how this would have gotten overshadowed.
The book, The Downhill Racers, 1963 by Oki Hill, who was also known for writing Westerns and a series of books, I think, about Ambrose Bierce in different adventures. Like he took the historical character and, fictionalized it. So that's a thing. Redford was named as a producer, Josh. This is a whole crazy story of the 60s. Robert Evans was running the studio. He gave this movie to Roman Polanski as a way to entice him to do Rosemary's Baby, because Polanski was such a big skier. So Polanski took both the movies and he offered both leads to Redford. Redford said no to Rosemary's Baby, but stayed on here as the lead of Downhill Racer, then left after Polanski left. Then Charlie Bluthorn sued him, and then he came back and ended up producing the movie.
Yeah, and I mean, a whole lot of things. I wonder, especially given what you're saying about that author writing about, writing Westerns and about Ambrose Bierce, I wonder if this book is anything like this at all. Supposedly, James Salter, the screenwriter, did not even read the book
Right.
before writing.
Well, when Polanski was on, he wanted to be a modern day High Noon, like a showdown between the old racer and the young racer, I guess.
And that maybe goes more with the Westerns that the author wrote. Camilla Sparv, the co-star here, was also married to Robert Evans. So a whole lot of different maneuvering going on to get everyone in place for this film.
The kid stays in the picture, baby.
Yeah. So although it was not a box office hit, it was generally well reviewed by critics. Roger Ebert said, "Some of the best moments in Downhill Racer are moments during which nothing special seems to be happening. They're moments devoted to capturing the angle of a glance, the curve of a smile, an embarrassed silence. Together they form a portrait of a man that is so complete and so tragic that Downhill Racer becomes the best movie ever made about sports, without really being about sports at all. The movie balances nicely between this level and the exuberance of its outdoor location photography. And it does a skillful job of involving us in the competition without really being a movie about competition. In the end, Downhill Racer succeeds so well that instead of wondering whether the hero will win the Olympic race, we want to see what will happen to him if he does."
Well, he did rank it as his ninth best movie of the year in '69. Best movie ever made about sports. That's wild, even at 69, I think. He loved this movie, Josh, and he did not really get his wish at the end to see what happens after he wins the race.
No, I mean, I think the idea is not that he wanted to see that, but rather that, like, that's what we're focused on. The internal life of this character versus the external competition and who's going to win it.
Yeah, what jumped out at me in that review was the idea that this is like a full, complete character. I don't think there are any full, complete characters in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partially intentional that because David Chaplet, the Robert Redford character, is so aloof that you don't understand him as a character, nor do really any of the people in his life quite understand him. And I think that's kind of the point. And I think we agree maybe that makes the movie tough to engage with, but I think that's something they're doing deliberately.
I don't mind that, but you have the coach character, Gene Hackman, you have his rival character, right? I just think there could have been one scene with a, conversation with someone who gets him on his level to kind of give the audience a little more juice there.
Right. I mean, even his fellow competitors are like, I couldn't tell them apart most of the time. And there isn't a moment where they sort of have a connection with their similar perspectives about seeking glory or anything like that.
You seek a lot of glory, Josh?
Well, I'm here on this podcast, so what else could I possibly be seeking? Roger Greenspun in the New York Times was also very positive. He said, "Except for the races and the final victory and some cool sex, there is very little in David's life. In appreciating that world, its pathos, its narcissism, its tensions, and its sufficient moments of glory, Downhill Racer succeeds with sometimes chilling efficiency. Within the limits imposed by the tangential nature of its insights, it is a very good movie. Although its medium is skiing, the real subject of the film is competition. In the style of many recent movies, it cuts among its subject and moods with great agility, mostly to build and only rarely to dispel anxiety."
Did you have anxiety while watching this? I had no anxiety.
No, but I think the idea is that it's trying to undercut the traditional sports movie idea of the like rousing victory. And instead of being thrilled by the achievements of these characters, we're worried about what might happen to them.
Maybe it gets a little more into the psyche there, but I think that, we keep coming back to the way they showcase the race. That could be anxiety inducing, just how unique and, first person viewpoint the photography is. Like, that's really where everything ratchets up here.
Right. I think so. And I mean, I think that's part of what they're saying. And of course, the introduction that we get to David Chaplet at the beginning of the movie is him wiping out so badly that he ends up in the hospital, and multiple other characters end up wiping out too in pretty horrific ways. So I think it's definitely conditioned us as viewers that every time one of these guys is going down the hill, we expect that they're going to be possibly very badly injured.
They feel the need for speed.
They do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not Top Gun here. Finally, the unbylined review in Time magazine, a little more mixed, said, Downhill Racer, a sober and straightforward story about an aggressive young skier on the international circuit, attempts to carom past the usual cliches by taking a fictionalized documentary approach. If on occasion it takes a spill or two, Downhill still comes through as a perceptive, unsentimental portrait of a young athlete on the make. A routine, but director Michael Ritchie freshens up his first film with some electrifying camera work. The exhilarating danger of downhill racing is perfectly portrayed with footage shot by pro skier Joe J. Jalbert, who held a camera in his hands instead of poles. Gene Hackman has just the right combination of brio and go, go, go as the coach, and Robert Redford's performance as the skier rings true down to the last shush. Downhill Racer is a modest effort, but a good one.
The last shh.
Right, exactly. I should have pronounced. That's clearly what they're trying to write there, and I should have pronounced it more like you did. Yes.
No, we're a team.
Yeah.
It's if one of us wins a medal, we all win a medal. Josh.
Yeah. Unlike David Chapelet, we understand that podcasting is a team sport.
That's right. Mm-hmm. We need to get JJJ to film some of our podcasting to add some excitement, since the GoPro on your head didn't add anything.
No, we need some better angles on this or something like that. Maybe we should be doing some extreme sports while we podcast.
Some dynamic work. Josh, like you said, we talked about Butch Cassidy last week, and then this, and then after this, I watched The Candidate, where Ritchie and Redford reteamed, which is 1970. And what the best thing about watching those like all in a row is to see the different levels, layers, efficiencies as a performer Robert Redford is, because we know him as this great leading man, but he's got a lot of range for that kind of, straightforward leading man type.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think either one of these reviews elsewhere or another review that I read mentioned that idea that Redford is really, this is such a different performance. He's so charismatic and jovial, even if he's the slightly more withdrawn character in Butch Cassidy. But here, he just drains all of that out of this person. Even though David Chapelet is this like sports champion, he has no charisma, right? Every time someone tries to interview him, he can barely like grunt out a couple words or whatever. And Redford perfectly embodies that character, even if it's tough to engage with it as a viewer. He definitely creates that character effectively.
And The Candidate is, him at his would-be senator best, coming on and taking on the incumbent and really charming the whole state of California.
Yeah, and I remember liking the Candidate when I saw it, although it's been quite a while since that was. I think you were a little less impressed.
They're all fine.
All right, that's great. So you had not seen this one before?
No, I hadn't seen it. Obviously, Michael Ritchie is like one of these guys whose name we all know, but he's never like, you never put him up with like a Scorsese or a Spielberg. And I'm not saying this to knock the guy, right? He's more of like a workman type director, but he's made some major films. So it was nice to dig into that this week. I really enjoyed going back and watching The Bad News Bears. One thing I really like about what he does it here, he does it in The Candidate, he does it in Bad News Bears, is he holds on his subjects a lot, even after like the dialogue is over, the scene's over. So you get this kind of verite feel. It's almost mixing like a docu style to these narrative films. And I think that's a really cool technique that I haven't seen anyone use to the way as effectively as he uses it.
Yeah, as that Time magazine article says, this is aiming for that documentary feel. And I think the skiing footage, the first person, the JJJ contribution is a big part of that. But yeah, I think you're right that we don't necessarily think of Michael Ritchie as one of these titans of 70s and 80s cinema the way that we do those other people. But at the same time, he does have a distinctive voice. And I think especially when you look at that body of work, and for me, realizing like, so many of these sports movies, and specifically about, the kind of sleazier aspects of sports, were movies that he made over the course of several decades along with other stuff. I think there is a certain sensibility that is there.
I tried to get Josh to watch Cops and Robertsons with Jack Palance and Chevy Chase this week. Michael Ritchie, mid-90s, maybe not top shelf for him.
Yeah, probably not the height of his career there. So, Dave, had you seen this movie before?
I had not. I did just watch Bad News Bears. We did a piecing it together, breaking it apart episode on it just like a month ago. So that was just recent. But I remember seeing this poster and just being like, wow, that is a killer poster.
Yeah.
So I was really interested to watch it.
Yeah, I think I might have been intrigued by that partially. I had seen this before, and it's also possible because I did like The Candidate and Prime Cut, which we'll talk about later maybe. And I don't know if I saw that before or after that, but that's a great movie. That's probably my favorite Michael Ritchie film. But I was intrigued by this, and I watched it just on its own at one point and was sort of underwhelmed and sort of felt that way this time too, which I think is kind of how we all felt.
But you mentioned that it's like, wasn't a big hit, but we all knew about this movie before we saw it. And it's like grown in reputation over the years. I think probably part of that is, that he's made other bigger sports movies and everything. But it's good to see this and then go watch the Bad News Bears and kind of see how that takes on an even more mainstream feel with the always hilarious Walter Matthau. That guy is just gold with comedy.
Yeah, and I still have not seen the Bad News Bears. I was going to try to watch that along with Digstown this week, and I watched Digstown, and then I ran out of time. But I should check it out at some point. And
what's wrong with you, Putz?
we gotta do a Walter Matthau film here eventually, so you can really jump into that impression. So I mean, I think you're right though too that this movie has grown. Like, I mean, I watched it on a Criterion Collection DVD. It certainly has a bigger reputation than its mediocre returns at the box office would have indicated at the time that it came out. So anything else you want to say about the background of this film, Jason?
When Redford jumped on as a producer, he traveled with the U.S. ski team, traveling on buses, sleeping in hallways, like really getting into that character, which, hey, not so bad if you're going to just be traveling all over Europe with a bunch of skiers and learning about the part.
Yeah, and a lot of the racing scenes were shot at actual Alpine Ski World Cup races that occurred during this period.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something. And there's a lot of in the end credits, like special thanks to all these organizations or whatever. They clearly worked with not only JJJ, but other professional skiers and organizations to get it right.
Dave will be happy to know the August 2016 issue of Premiere Magazine ranked this the 4th best movie poster ever, Josh. So how about that?
It is a cool poster. Nice. Yeah, I feel like it's not necessarily indicative of the movie per se, but it is a cool looking poster.
And last thing I wanted to say is Richard Gregson, the producer, we're talking about people married to people, was married to Natalie Wood, and she worked as an assistant behind the scenes of this movie. She was an extra in one scene. She did script revisions, typed them up, did some wardrobe and props work. Good for Natalie Wood.
Yeah, way to contribute there. So we'll come back and talk some more of our general thoughts on Downhill Racer. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we are talking about debut feature Downhill Racer from Michael Ritchie. And unfortunately, it seems like we were all sort of meh on this movie.
My thing is, like I said, the highlights are those incredible racing scenes. And that, I think, elevated it a little higher up for me than you guys. But you got Redford, you got Hackman, and neither of them really have much to do other than ski and talk about skiing. And I needed a little more meat. There's one scene in the hotel where Hackman confronts Redford, and it was just a very surfacey confrontation. And I just thought they left a lot of meat on the bone. And as good as these actors are, there wasn't enough there for them to really flesh out what needed to happen for this to ascend to a higher level.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. But at the same time, I think the idea of what you just said, that all these guys do is ski and talk about skiing, is kind of the point, that they don't really have anything else in their lives or anything else that they care about. I mean, we never really learn anything about Gene Hackman's character, the coach, beyond his interaction with the players. And maybe he has, or they're not players, I guess, the skiers.
Athletes.
I know about sports. Maybe he has a whole home life, right? Maybe he has a wife and kids, or maybe who knows what's going on with him outside of the team. I mean, the only other stuff we see is his efforts to raise money to help them get to their competitions and have equipment and stuff like that. But I think part of the point with Redford's character, with David Chaplet, is that he doesn't have anything, as one of those reviews points out. there is nothing else in his life. I mean, even his relationships with women here seem pretty hollow. And, all he can focus on is skiing. And I did like the scene where he goes home to his like small town in Colorado and talks to his father, who does not care at all about his skiing career. It's an effective look at where he came from and maybe where he got his own sort of indifference to other people's feelings.
Not just that, but you had mentioned the girlfriend, the European girlfriend, that didn't really work for me at all. But the stuff when he goes back home and he sees the girlfriend that he left to go pursue his career, I thought that was much better from character work and dynamics. So I don't mind the fact that like, hey, we're obsessed. This is what, look, I love sports. I don't mind like the idea of getting into it, but I would have maybe like say Hackman had none of those things, right? Well, let's get into why he chose this over that or whatever it is. I just think they left off some elements that could have helped shade this and bring you more emotional investment into the project.
Right. I agree. And I think, or we could have seen a contrast here, right? We understand that David Chaplet has nothing else in his life, is not really looking for anything else in his life. But what about maybe one of those other competitors or whatever, or the coach, right? Maybe we could see that they have a better balance or a different perspective. And we don't, especially the other team members, like he has one conversation with the guy whose name is DK, right? I think, and he asks him like what it stands for. And the guy talks about a bit about his background. And he had a good line or something when he says he was at Dartmouth and he's like, I was one of the Olympic hopefuls. Like, they weren't hopeful. I was. And I thought that was, gives you a sense of that guy briefly, but then nothing. There's really not anything else. Or the other teammate who gets severely injured. Like, we don't really understand them as people at all.
And that would have been interesting because he does get injured, right? And he was the favorite for the Olympics. This is something people work their whole lives for, right? So, I think there was more meat there. There could have been more of that rivalry between him and Chaplet. But that's okay. I want to bring Dave in right now because I thought this was the strangest score that I can remember. Like, this felt like a Hitchcockian, like caper score or something. Like, we're ratcheting up the suspense. It didn't match the movie for me at all.
Yeah, I really loved the score in the beginning, and then the movie never actually matched what was happening with the score in the beginning. So you're right. Like, it never finds its footing as being for this movie, really, even though I actually liked the music on its own.
Yeah, it's a very downbeat movie, and you would expect a sort of more like melancholy score, and that's not what they're going for. Maybe the idea was to contrast the music with the tone of the story and the characters, but I agree that it doesn't really fit.
There was also that terrible song in the nightclub, Open Up and Let Me In. The music's just terrible all the way through. Josh, you were talking about certain lines. I think Hackman, I wrote down this line that he goes, these guys aren't amateurs, they're national heroes. You're trying to beat them out of their way of life. And I thought like, oh, there's a great jumping off point to see like what the Americans have to do to get to that level. What's different between skiing in our culture versus the European country culture. Like, I thought again, like, oh, now my mind's going, and then nothing really happens with it.
Right. We get the idea that, and I don't know if this is the case anymore, but at the time, at least, that the American skiers are kind of dismissed and they're underdogs compared to the Europeans who always end up winning all of these championships. And a little bit, there's one line too where Redford is talking about being somewhere and he's carrying around his skis and people are like, oh, where do you jump? And, the idea that downhill racing, which I think was maybe newish at the time, is looked down upon versus other kind of ski competitions like ski jumping, for example. And we never really get any more of that either.
Right. And there's this whole sequence where, the guy who plays Machette comes in and he wants to sponsor both Redford and our friend who got injured, Creech. I think it was Creech,
yeah,
right?
Creech he's the other big competitor.
Well, where's the conflict if they're both getting the deal, right? If one of them gets the deal and Chaplet's like, that should be me. Well, you haven't won anything yet, so it's not going to be you. Well, I'm going to win, and he's going to regret not signing me, as opposed to just like, you're both good. I'm going to sign you both. And you can go fuck my assistant.
Who is also his mistress, seemingly.
Right. Hey, free love, summer of 69.
Absolutely. I don't know if it's summer because it's a lot of snow.
Winter of 69.
Yeah. But
The B-side to the Bryan Adams song.
I think part of the point there, though, is that I don't know if that conflict would have worked, because the idea is that Chaplet clearly does not care about being sponsored. You know, the guy's like, I'm going to give you free skis. And he's like, oh, yeah, okay. And, you know, when he shows up at the company's office because he's looking for his girlfriend who has kind of blown him off, and she's not there, but he ends up talking to the head of the company, and the guy's like, oh, how were my skis? Like, tell me your thoughts. And he's like, I don't know. Whatever. You know, like, he clearly does not care at all about that. And that's part of the point of his character. Like, it's interesting because he says to his dad at one point, when the dad's like, why are you doing this? And he's like, well, when I become a champion, you know, an Olympic champion, then that gets me fame and fortune and all this. And that's why we do all these, you know, amateur competitions. But at the same time, the like endorsement kind of thing or sponsorship that you're describing is exactly what would make him money after being an Olympic champion. And he's not paying attention to it at all.
Well, so there you go. There's plenty of ways to go about that, even if, like you're saying, he doesn't care. Well, then how do we draw the conflict in from how he doesn't care? We keep talking about the girlfriend played by Robert Evans' wife, Camilla
Sparv.
Sparv?
Yeah.
Really wild that Robert Evans would cast a lady that he's romantically involved with in one of his movies.
Yeah.
She didn't bring much to the party for me, Josh. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. And I don't know how much her association with Robert Evans contributed to her casting here. I mean, you look at her, this is basically the height of her career. Subsequently is just a lot of kind of TV one-off guest starring appearances and stuff like that. I didn't think she was bad, but I think to get the sense, especially because Chaplet is presented as so aloof and so like above emotion, essentially. And he gets kind of obsessed with her, right? He travels.
Yeah, it's all emotion with her.
Yeah. And I think in order for us to understand that she's kind of broken through in that way to get him rattled, we need a character who is more compelling instead of just kind of a blank slate, like what she ends up with. So I don't know if that's just her performance or the way it's been directed, the way it's been written, whatever it is, you don't get that sense of engagement or the sense that, you know, this is what has kind of broken through to this guy who doesn't get rattled by, you know, ski injuries and his competitors and all of that kind of stuff.
But you know what? Beautiful scenery, lovely photography, two of our favorite actors. So, you know, you take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have Downhill Racer.
Yeah, the sitcom Downhill Racer. So, no, it's, I mean, there are moments, like one thing I like going back to the whole sequence where he goes to his hometown. And I really like, too, you mentioned the hometown sort of ex-girlfriend or whatever it is, and he goes and picks her up, and clearly he's kind of tossed her aside before, but she's like, okay. And then they go have sex in a car, and she seems like she's trying to re-engage with him or whatever, and she's telling him about her life, how she might go off to college and become a dental hygienist and trying to open up, and he does not give a shit at all. And she's kind of like, so what do you think? And he's like, I don't know, do whatever you want. And he's just like looking for gum or something.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and that, like you said, that character is very closed off, but maybe we needed a little more verbal cues from him to open that up a little more.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, I feel like in concept, this is the kind of thing I like because I don't care about sports. And for me, like, as cool as the skiing scenes were, one of them kind of got it for me. I was like, all right, that looks cool. And then every time, the other thing about downhill racing is it's not a very interesting sport, right? They just it's the only thing to watch is like, are they going to die? Are they going to crash? Right?
I mean, you could say that about a lot of, you know, many sports, though.
I
right?
would. But I mean, okay, as a sports guy, did you find would you watch downhill, like the Olympics?
Yeah, I assume the Olympics, I would watch it. Sure.
Yeah, is it an interesting sport to watch?
It's not my favorite. I mean, you know, there's slalom. I mean, like you said, there's ski jump. That's more exciting because the guys are flying 60 feet in the air, right? But, you know, everything evolves. That doesn't mean it can't be interesting. But no, I mean, the Tour de France, like people love getting up early to watch that. And that's just watching a bunch of dudes ride bicycles up a mountain, trying not to fall off the mountain and die, right? So
yeah, I mean, all of these things, I don't know. I look at like car racing and there's just like, they're just driving in circles. But I guess in that way too, like a lot of the appeal probably is maybe these guys will die horrifically, and that's sad. But I think that's probably what people are watching.
Well, you know, we mentioned the Bad News Bears.
Oh, they don't die horrifically, do they?
No,
really
no, but like the baseball is so secondary to everything around the baseball, right? Like
right.
You watch the games because you're invested in the characters at that point and how they kind of affect that. And, I know you didn't like Digstown as much as I did, but I think, and I don't necessarily think he shot the boxing sequences great, but I was invested in those characters. So I wanted to watch those fights.
Yeah, I mean, and what I was trying to say is that as someone who doesn't care about sports, if I'm watching a sports movie, what is going to appeal to me is what you just described, is the idea that I care about these characters, or, the idea in this movie that this is not about the rousing win or whatever. This is about sort of the emptiness of this competitor. I feel like that is something that in theory really appeals to me, but just for this particular instance of it, it didn't work. And but I agree with you. That's what I'm interested in watching a sports movie for.
Yeah, I mean, that said, like, look, we've talked about Raging Bull. Like, that's some of the most beautiful photography ever put on film. So I like that stuff too. I like the whole thing when it works. But Josh, like Chapelette, this one left you empty inside.
It did, yeah. And I mean, and when we did our episode on Raging Bull, I thought Raging Bull was fantastic, and the boxing scenes are creatively shot in Raging Bull, and that's great. But there's also not that much of them. You really spend far more time with the characters in their out of the ring life. And that's what really grabs me in that movie too.
Yeah, right. Should we rate this thing out of 5 downhill races, 5 Olympic trial races, Josh?
Sure. 5 wipeouts, maybe?
Sure. That's what we'll do. You like horrific injuries.
I do. Yeah, that's what I want to watch.
You know what? I gave it 3. I know you guys are going lower and you're probably right. I think I gave it that extra half star because I was so impressed with that photography. And it's tough when you have Redford and Hackman to go below that. But you're probably right, guys.
Yeah, I mean, those are all great aspects. And I think if you are more engaged than I was in the races that do look really cool, that there's more excitement there for you, even if the character drama kind of doesn't work. And these are great actors. So yeah, I give it 2.5 out of 5. And that was what I gave it the first time I saw it. And I thought maybe I'd be a little more into it this time, but it just doesn't reach me, I feel like. And I think that is part of the point, but it doesn't fully succeed, I think, at what it's trying to do. So Dave, how would you rate this?
Yeah, I'm also going 2.5. I like it in theory, what they're trying to do with the character. I just don't think it really necessarily works.
Yeah. How would you rate the poster?
Maybe a 5.
All
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
It's a good poster.
It was ranked the really 4th best of all time.
Yeah.
Wow.
We'll come back and talk about the legacy of Downhill Racer. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we are talking about the feature debut from Michael Ritchie, Downhill Racer. And as we've talked about, he is still best known for all of these kind of sleazeball sports movies. We mentioned The Bad News Bears, which is the most famous, certainly, and Digstown, which we both watched this week, which is a boxing movie, but also kind of a con artist movie. And it's fun, but the way I felt about that, again, is that like the con artist movie it is not the best, but it was enjoyable. But there was so much boxing that I did not care about in that movie.
Yeah, well, hey, that's the difference between me and you, Josh.
Yes. So other sports movies throughout his career, sports or sports adjacent movies, Wildcats with Goldie Hawn, The Scout with Albert Brooks, Semi-Tough with Burt Reynolds, which I've also seen, and that's a pretty well-known one. And the notable HBO movie, The Positively True Adventures of the Alleged Texas Cheerleader Murdering Mom.
Yeah, I mean, and like I said, those 80s comedies, The Golden Child, Fletch, like, he was in it. He was in the thick of it, baby.
Yeah, and I mean, someone also known for these kind of satires like The Candidate. I wanted to watch Smile, which is a kind of satire about beauty pageants, which is supposed to be quite good and wasn't available to watch, unfortunately. And I, again, have to put in my plug for Prime Cut, which is a thriller starring Lee Marvin, and Gene Hackman. So very different, like stylistically, from these other movies that he's best known for, but is really good, I think, and underrated. So we're checking out.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out. I know, obviously, Redford and Hackman both like Ritchie. They both reteamed with him, right? So,
yeah.
I mentioned Robert Evans, one of the all-time greatest autobiographies ever written. The Kid Stays in the Picture, an amazing documentary. He's got that very distinct voice that he uses to narrate it. I recommend both of those. I've read the movie and seen the book, Josh.
All right. Have you? Do you have a Robert Evans impression? I feel
I'd have to hear it again, but it was a lot of like the best one I ever heard was Bob Odenkirk used to do this bit as if right, Robert Evans was God, right, and I'd be like, hey God, what happened with the Nazis, World War II? What was that all about? He was, I was out taking a schwitz, baby.
Yeah, I mean, he does like, I don't know if I can't do impressions either, but the documentary, the real appeal of it is it's essentially like an illustrated audiobook, and it's about hearing.
But it does look great too.
Yeah, it's got a cool look to it, but it's more about hearing him tell those stories in his very distinctive voice, and that's what's enjoyable, I think, about that.
Josh, we've talked about Redford multiple times. We've talked about Hackman multiple times. So I think we're going to move on from those two on this one, just because you can listen to our episodes on Butch Cassidy, on Bonnie and Clyde. If you want to hear more about that, I think we've tied, Ordinary People. And I think we did one other Hackman.
Unforgiven, which is the role that Hackman got an Oscar for. Yeah, we have that episode as well. And I like that Gene Hackman, I might have said this before, but he retired in 2004, and I feel like actors don't like retire and stay retired, and he did. He's 94 now, and all we get, he's still got the paparazzi taking photos of him at like the gas station, which was kind of lame of them, really.
Yeah.
But the fact that people still are like, what is he doing? This guy, he just walked away 20 years ago, and he's still just hanging out, going to the convenience store. Like, how is that possible?
I mean, he wrote some books. I miss him as an actor. He's one of the all-time best, right?
He is indeed.
So you mentioned Camilla Sparv. She was in Dead Heat on a Merry-Go-Round. That was kind of her other big thing. Some of the other actors, Carl Michael Vogler, who played Machette, was in Patton and a version of Hamlet. Creech, Jim McMullen starred in Ben Casey and on Dallas on TV. And of course, Dabney Coleman, who I think we've mentioned here in our 9 to 5 episode, had a nice little part in this one too. So I've covered everything, Josh. Bye.
Yeah, I mean, but the thing is that like all of it, even Dabney Coleman, who's such a distinctive,
I didn't even know who he was.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Like there's nothing to any of those other characters really. Camilla Sparv has not acted since 1992, and again, kind of had a sparse career with mostly one-offs on TV shows.
Sparse career,
exactly. She did win a Golden Globe, one of the sort of like trumped up, like made up Golden Globes as most promising newcomer female in 1967 for her role in that movie Dead Heat on a Merry-Go-Round, which I've never heard of.
I haven't either, but there's this merry-go-round, right? And maybe there's a race, but the two of them, they're tied. It's a dead heat, Josh. That's what I think. It's a
I'm going to guess that that's not what it's about, but maybe you're right. It could be.
How did we miss this when we covered 67?
Yeah, it just passed us by. Maybe we'll have to get a bonus episode in on that one. I did want to mention again, Joe J. Jalbert, the ski double, who, I mean, the contributions that he makes are key to this film. Not only standing in for Redford when we see him doing these races, but also strapping that camera on himself to get those POV shots. And this launched him into a career as like a producer and cameraman and director of sports videos and documentaries. He produced over 800 sports packages and documentary specials and things like that aired mostly on TV. And in 2013, he was inducted into the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame.
That's pretty cool. Those ski movies have quite the following. Who is it? Walter, what's his name? The guy who tours him all the time.
I don't know, but yeah, I mean, there's a whole genre of these kind of outdoor sports, extreme sports movies.
Warren Miller, Josh. Miller.
And I think our JJJ was probably a pioneer of that kind of thing in this time period.
Way to go, JJJ.
Yeah. So do you have a favorite ski movie, Jason?
Ooh, yes. We've actually talked about it recently. I'm going to pick Better Off Dead.
All right. Yeah. I know you love the 80s comedies, and I haven't seen Better Off Dead in a long time, but I did really like it. And of course, stuff like Ski School and Ski Patrol and whatever, these super cheesy. Yeah. That's where skiing ended up in the films as this sort of like symbol of snobbery or whatever, right? In these 80s comedies.
Right. And then you get Hot Tub Time Machine, and you get some of the, what was it? Downhill was the remake of the Oslin movie, right?
I mean, that's not really about skiing, but it is set at a ski resort.
What about you, Josh? You picking a favorite?
I mean, I don't know. I maybe it's probably Better Off Dead. I'd have to watch it again, but that's my instinct, just because there aren't that many, and there really are very, very few that are like this, that are serious movies about the sport of skiing.
Yeah.
I mean, we had what is it, Eddie the Eagle recently, about the sort of like accidental Olympian, and that was pretty lame. But at least that was like a real. It was comedic, but it was supposed to be a biopic of a real guy. But
didn't the remake of Point Break involve like extreme skiing?
It might have at one point. They did a bunch of different. They did like cliff jumping and skydiving, and they might have skied at some point. I don't remember. So,
Dave, you agree? Better Off Dead. That's got to be the pick.
Oh, of course, absolutely.
We're done, Josh. Let's social media this thing.
Okay, that's Downhill Racer, and that's this episode of Awesome Movie Year. We are online and on social media.
Jason Harris Comedy or Jay Harris Comedy on all the socials. Go for Jason on Letterboxd. Also check out Eat This Comedy. More shows coming. So that's exciting. We are at awesomemovieyear.com. Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram. Awesome Movie Pod on the platform that crashed during the race.
Yes, that platform I am also on. You can find some old stuff from me at joshbellhateseverything.com. I am at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on that X-Twitter platform, as well as on Blue Sky and on Letterboxd. And if you're on Letterboxd and you watch this movie or any of the movies we cover, tag your review Awesome Movie Year. We'd love to know what you think about the movies we talk about. And you can listen to our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod.
And check out that recent episode about the Bad News Bears, right?
Good plug there, Josh.
What did you pick, Dave, when you broke it apart?
Oh, we talked.
Recap your whole episode right now.
Yeah, I got to recap the. I know we did Big Daddy was on there. Yeah. We trying to.
That's good
else.
enough.
Yeah. Listen to the episode. Check it out.
Yeah.
You can hear a more articulate version of that.
Yeah.
And check out our next episode. Jason, what are we talking about?
We're going to a box office flop. Josh, I don't even know this movie. I'm excited to flop it out there with you. It's called The Comic.
Directed by Carl Reiner, starring Dick Van Dyke. Tune in next time for The Comic. And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.